Apologetics is a term used in the West as the practice of the defense of faith. In the East, there was traditionally no such need, as already by the time of Constantine the Great, the society of the Roman Empire was converting into Christianity until it eventually became entirely Christianized. The issue of defending Orthodox Christianity has only now arisen as Eastern and Western Christianity meet again after centuries of parting due to the long captivity of the Eastern Church under Islam, under the Mongols, or under communism. Moreover, by the present time, the majority of Western society has become atheist, while remaining Western Christians in North America and parts of Western Europe have often entrenched themselves in partisan doctrines that have been influenced by the Roman Inquisition. The Inquisition had deemed the exercise of reason and the advancement of science as threats to Christianity. Perhaps influenced by Tertullian, a 3rd century Christian layman who wrote in Latin and who considered the Old Testament the only source of truth, the Inquisition used spurious passages from the Old Testament whenever they deemed it convenient to stifle and condemn scientific discourse. The great divide between the churches was not so much the fine details about the nature of the third person of the Trinity, but the divergent belief in the rationality of the miracles of Christ. For the Orthodox faith, Christ is Logos, that is, reason. Therefore, there is no room for the irrational, not even in what would have appeared miraculous. The apparently miraculous must have by necessity a rational explanation, even if one that is not quite understood. This is similar to the position that the mathematician Gottfried Leibniz presented in his Theodicy when he argued that faith cannot be opposed to reason. For example, the Orthodox Church found no issues with Galileo's proposal. The Roman Inquisition, however, had taken a different view. It had decided that the miracles of Christ do not have a rational explanation, and perhaps by extension, nothing else does. For over 8,000 years after the separation of Eastern and Western Roman empires, classical scholarship was lost to the West, and few, if any, in the Western Church attended Orthodox liturgy and could understand Greek or could read Greek to see that the original Greek text, in place of the Latin verbum, the word, has logos in the original, and that logos in Greek has the meaning of reason. Hence, the world created by reason, according to the Greek text, was created against reason, according to the view eventually developed by the Roman Inquisition. Whereas the energies of God, the world of experience, can be known according to Orthodox belief, science was an enemy of faith, according to the Inquisition. This is such a great division between the faith of the two churches, the Eastern and the Western, that it can be said that what appears as the same religion on the surface diverges on one of the most essential points, the question of what God is. Western scholars are so accustomed to the enmity to science among Western fundamentalists that they do not seem ever to consider the thought that we Orthodox Christians actually believe that God is experienced through reason and science. The exploration of nature indicates the majesty of the Creator and is not at variance with biblical truths which cannot be interpreted literally. The Scripture should not always be understood literally, but often rhetorically. The energies of God are mentioned by St. Paul, but are translated as God's powers or grace in the Latin Bible. Much as other language from classical philosophy did not have equivalents in Latin and other languages, the energies of God were mistranslated. Christian traditions in the West have been set up allegedly on the truth of the scriptures and their literal reading, and yet the translated texts are sometimes imperfectly translated as to literally say something other than what was originally intended, for lack of words and lack of equivalent ideas. The word energies was used in classical philosophy, for example by Aristotle, to indicate that the movement of the body is caused by the energies of the mind or psyche, and by extension, all observed movement in general is due to an agency. The idea was given a clear meaning in Orthodox Christianity during a 14th century debate between two learned Orthodox monks, Saint Gregory Palamas and Barlaam of Calabria, both of whom had a background in science and philosophy. They debated the meaning of the energies of God. The writings of Barlaam have been unfortunately lost, so his exact position is unknown. The Church decided in favor of Saint Gregory Palamas, who was arguing that whereas the essence of the Trinity is unknowable, the energies of God are the objects of experience. Barlaam is said to have instead argued that God may not be experienced at all and must be unknowable in his totality, including in his energies. Therefore, our experiences are of things that are caused by the energies of God, but are not the energies of God themselves. That view would imply that the created world is perhaps a free-running, no longer divine end result, something partly separated from Logos or linked in some unclear way to Logos, a concept perhaps similar to the Platonic ideas versus material reality. Plato had argued that the things we experience are a less perfect appearance of their immaterial ideas or categories which cannot be experienced, but are the immaterial ideal, the perfect, the ideal. Such a view that the created world is not the energies of God, but a product of the energies, might potentially give priority to the writings in the Old Testament as a more immediate truth of God when compared to the experience of the products of the energies of God. This approach could lead to the eventuality that if scientific observation suggested that the earth revolved around the sun, but some statement from the Bible could be construed as indicating that the sun revolves around the earth, the scientific theory is falsified. Barlaam's view came closer to the developing Catholic and Western interpretation. Western Christians sometimes imagine the view of St. Gregory Palamas and of the Orthodox Church as a belief in a mystical experience of God. If so, the mystical experience of God is not of the kind one usually thinks of in Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on. Indeed, it is perhaps the very opposite of what is commonly thought of as mystical, because it is a belief in reason and in reality. The Orthodox belief has always been that the created world around us, the physical laws, causality, inference, our human reason, our empirical knowledge, and our capacity for free will are the energies of God. That means that everything is the energies of God except for actions of our own individual human free will. On the other hand, in the view of the Roman Inquisition, presumably causality and reason are unfortunate accidents of God's creation. Copernicus, who was a Christian priest, used mathematics to justify why the Sun is the center around which the Earth and the other planets revolve. Galileo, also a Christian, made observations using a telescope, supporting the theory of Copernicus. To the Inquisition, Copernicus and Galileo had reached that conclusion by the unfortunate accident of using rational thinking and empirical observation. From what we know, there was no effort to oppose the theory with a rational counter-argument. Instead, a passage was found in the Old Testament about a story surrounding a character called Gideon. The story had nothing to do with astronomy or physics. At one point in the story, it was said that the sun stood still above Gibeon. If the sun stood still above Gibeon, to the Inquisition that was proof that the earth does not move. It is not much of a logical argument, but after all, reason had been deemed the enemy of faith. It should be obvious that the trend the Roman Inquisition set is alive and well in America today, among many vocal, self-professed Christians defending the literal reading of the Old Testament, some seeing the earth as only about 7,000 years old, others, however, believing it is older, some not believing in the dinosaurs, others not believing in bacteria and viruses because they are not said in the Old Testament to have been created by God, others yet not believing that the earth is round or that the planets exist, many presumably believing that Noah saved the mammoth, the penguin, and the kangaroo, all of them reading the Old Testament literally nonetheless. To our fellow fundamentalist Christians, it may be pointed out that stories being told at a time before literacy, let alone before science, cannot be held as proof of reality. They are useful historically in charting a path in the development of monotheism and ultimately Christianity. They are essential for the Church as they explain the Jewish customs, they believe in the prophecies and other contexts about the life of Christ and the rise of Christianity. The Old Testament stories were, however, interpreted by the fathers of the Church according to Christian belief even during early Christianity, and such examples abound in the saints' surviving writings. Many Western Christians, especially Protestants, ignore completely these writings where the saints are presenting and interpreting the Old Testament using the New Testament as their guide, sometimes making reference to classical philosophers and scientists, all the while using rational arguments and making recourse to the scientific and encyclopedic knowledge of their time. To some Western Christians, even today, logical argumentation is the enemy of faith, Western Christians being often hostile to the mention of the words reason and logic. Unfortunately, with their attacks on science, they achieve little other than embarrass themselves and also embarrass, pollute, and harm the Church. Atheists will misunderstand their ignorance as being representative of the Christian Church as a whole, also outside America, consequently dismissing the fathers of the Church, the saints, evangelists, and apostles as unlearned men and merchants of falsehoods.